So in 1965, two cave explorers were involved in a study to test the effects of isolation, loneliness, and darkness by living alone in separate, dark, desolate caves for months. Sounds like something fun to do on your summer vacation, right? And the only contact that they had with anyone was with the researchers who tracked their sleeping and eating habits, as well as their memory and vital signs. Okay, so they had people that were helping them, to protect them and get the information they needed, but that was the only contact that they had. They weren't given any information about how time was passing outside of the caves, so they weren't given any clues to that. To really know what was going on, just what was necessary during the study. One of the explorers spent 88 days in the cave, and the other spent 126 days. That's hard to imagine, isn't it? Thinking about 126 days, that's 4 months. I think a bit more things I would like to do than spending that time in a cave. But here were some of the effects that happened when they emerged from the caves in the study. First thing they had to do, was wear some dark goggles because when they were exposed back to the light, it was difficult for them. Imagine being in darkness for 3 or 4 months and coming out and being hit by the light and how that affected them. They couldn't handle the light with their eyes being adjusted and accommodating to being in darkness. Their sense of time was off. They actually, more time had passed than they realized. It threw their whole sense of time off. They came out thinking that they showed that it was in April when one of them came out of the cave, and they thought it was February. So their sense of time was all out of whack because of being in darkness. Their sleep cycles were affected. It was not unusual for have like a 30-hour sleep cycle. And now that's a good nap. There's a few times we probably feel like we'd like to have a 30-hour sleep cycle to catch up on some things, wouldn't we? But it just throws their whole routine off. Isolation that they experience can cause delusions. It said they turned to try to find a friend, a companion, and they would find mice somehow, and then they wanted the mice to be their companion. Imagine that. That's your only friend, is Mickey Mouse, Well, think back to how it was, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks. And his best friend was Wilson, right? Wilson the volleyball. How he put a face on him and that was his best friend during his time on that island. Just think about that, how delusional we must be to have a volleyball as our best friend. But in the situations, your mind really changes from what is normal. This technique of darkness and isolation was often used in wartime as far as prisoners of war. To torture them. In a British study, they took 6 volunteers and put them in dark solitary confinement for a 48-hour test. Now, 48 hours is a lot less than 126 days. But even in that period of time, they found out that their emotions went out of control. It was just all over the place. Your sense of normalcy is gone. They lost their sense of time, and they began to suffer hallucinations, even being in darkness for 48 hours. So if you think about these effects, they're definitely not the way we're wired. They're not normal. And some of the things that can happen, we see as humans, we need light. We need interaction with others. That's the way we're wired. Our bodies need the light, and we're designed for that. We need a proper balance between darkness and night to rest and be active. But think about how we often get in the wintertime. when there's no sun. And we're not in a cave for 126 days, but think about how it affects a lot of people in the wintertime. You see wintertime depression for people. The no sunshine like we see today. We look out the back door now and see the sun. It lifts our spirits, doesn't it? So when we experience just even a lot of cloudy days for a long period of time, we feel the effects of that. We can lose our sense of time and direction, and we can become delusional with different things like that. So what does this mean to us as Christians? And I think you know where I'm headed with this, probably. But the world we live in is full of darkness, isn't it? Everywhere we turn, there seems to be darkness. Emotions are running wild. We see delusions that we talked about. There's delusions about what is right and wrong. People are delusional in their outlook. They've lost the idea of truth. And now truth is whatever you want to make it. There's delusional ideas about truth. And there's also a loss of sense of the big picture. As those people were in the caves for that long period of time, their sense of time, they lost that. They didn't even realize that they'd been there longer than they thought. And so we can see that when we are in darkness in our lives, we can lose sense of the big picture. We're totally consumed by what we see in front of us, or imagine in front of us, I guess you could say, when we're full of darkness in our lives. Individually, we can lose sight of the truth. We can think differently toward the truth, right? As Christians, we're living our lives and we get lost in sin, or we get caught up in the darkness of this world and turn away from God, then we can lose sense of the truth. We can wander aimlessly with no way of seeing where we're going. Imagine being in a cave and not be able to see where you're going. You're just wandering all over the place. The chances of stumbling, getting hurt increases, right? Think of what happens when you're in a room that's full of light and all of a sudden it goes dark. And you have to adjust, and it's kind of uncomfortable for a little while. You can trip over something, those type of things. It leads to a tendency to isolate and withdraw from people. If we're caught up in darkness, what's the last thing we want to be around when we're caught up in darkness in the spiritual sense? Light, right? We don't want to be around that. And we have trouble handling the light, just like those who came out of the cave and had to have the goggles. The light was uncomfortable, and it was strong, and it was probably painful for them. So that gets me where I'm going with this. The Bible tells us what the light truly is. And in John 8:12 is where I want to start. In John 8:12. Takes me a little while to get this. Is a new Bible, so these pages want to stick together. Okay, John 8:12. It says, "Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of light." The light of life. That's what Jesus is to us. Now, the world does not always want to look at Jesus and see the light. Now, they want to look at Jesus and see a threat. One who condemns the things that the world wants to do. And when we get caught up in the world, if we're not careful, we can fail to see Jesus for the true light that he is. And, the more we want to stay in darkness. As Christians, we are to be people that walk in the light. I want to look at Ephesians 5 and verse 8. Ephesians 5, verse 8. Is that right? I think that's the wrong scripture. Sorry about that. Okay, here it is, sorry. There it is. "For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light, for the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true." So we're told to walk in the light. If Christ is the light, we're to walk in him. We're to walk in the light. And as it says in this scripture, for the fruit of light, which is the goodness, the truth, the good things in this world, is found in what Jesus teaches us, what we know to do, what is right. But it says, but at one time, it says, the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. In this dark world, don't we see the opposite now? What was good and righteous and true is now looked upon as evil. It's kind of flipped around, hasn't it? And if we're not careful, we can get caught up into that. It's not much fun living a life in darkness. I can find in my life, if I'm not as close to the Lord as I need to be, I feel like one that's been in the cave, stumbling around, might be a little delusional about what's going on around me. I might be isolated from others. I may not have the peace and comfort that I need because I'm walking in the darkness. When we're in a dark, uncomfortable place, it's not something that we're finding a whole lot of peace in. If you're walking down a dark alley or some more strange place or something like that you're not comfortable with, that you've never been before, it's a little creepy, isn't it? You kind of put up your defenses a little bit. But what we have to be careful of is not get accustomed to walking in darkness. Think about it, when that light first goes off and the room becomes dark, it's a little hard to see for a while, isn't it? But if it's not pitch black in the room, your eyes will eventually focus to try to adapt to whatever light is available in that room. And the longer you're in that situation, the more you get accustomed to it, isn't it? And we have to be careful not to get accustomed to being in darkness. There's an emptiness. I can tell you that again if I talk about my own self. There's an emptiness if I'm not with the Lord where I need to be. The darkness doesn't bring you peace. It doesn't bring you fulfillment. We're warned about the effects of darkness. In Ephesians 5, where we're at now, in verse 13, it says, but when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore, it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. If we have things of darkness in our life, the light wants to expose it. The light being Jesus, the light being his word. It exposes that in our lives, and that's not a comfortable feeling, is it? When we look in the mirror and realize that we have too much darkness in our lives. Jesus will expose that. Then we have to decide what to do with that. We don't want to be delusional enough to not even realize that we're in darkness. If we are not with the Lord and in his light, we're in the darkness. And that's nowhere that we want to be. We have to be willing to admit to ourselves that we're walking in darkness. John 3:20. John 3 and verse 20 says, for everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. If you go on to verse 21, it says, but whoever does what is true comes to the light so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. It's clearly seen if you're walking in the light. If we don't want to be around the light, then like it says, they hate the light. John 11, verse 10 is another verse I want to look at. John 11, verse 10. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. We see again, that's what happens when we're not following Christ. We're going to stumble. And that's not a place that we want to be. So I wanted to bring that up tonight, just to think about how are we doing in our lives? Are we walking in darkness? Are we walking in the light? Are we content? If we're in darkness, are we content to be there? We have stern warnings for us if we are walking in that darkness.